Hello, everyone. Welcome back to latest episode of the Precursive Perspective. Really excited about this one today. Been trying to get Mr. Peter Wride onto my podcast for a few years. I've got a doc. I've got the other doc up, which is when we were supposed to do this when you were at Gainsight. And then he left and
Years,
left me
yeah.
hanging. So there we go. It's great to see you. Monday morning in what, Utah, right?
In Utah, yeah.
Yeah, very nice. Well, welcome along. Welcome along. Give our listeners and viewers, as it were, a little bit of an introduction to yourself and a bit about your role now and history and all of that jazz.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Jonathan, for having me. I always enjoy interacting with the Precursive team. I love what you're doing from a thought leadership perspective. Not a lot of good stuff out there, and what your team puts out is phenomenal. So I appreciate
Oh, thanks,
having
man.
me. Yeah, so I run SVP of Professional Services at a company called DFIN. And we provide regulatory software for public companies, for private companies, mutual funds, regulated investment firms. We make sure that the SEC is happy with what you're putting out there. So it's been a great ride. I've been here about 2 years, and as Jonathan mentioned, previously had the same role over at Gainsight, where I was there for 5 years, and then have had a career in professional services, customer success, and I'm a reformed salesperson. I actually started my career in sales, and we'll touch a little bit on that today. But very much enjoyed my different tours of duty across the different spectrums. Based out of Utah, have 5 kids ranging from a senior in high school to a first grader. So we are in all the different throes of life at the moment, but it's a lot of fun.
All right. Five. Wow. I mean, I've got two and two dogs, and I'm busy. I'm sure I could handle. What kind of car does one have for seven? Is that like an 18 van?
No, it's close. It's actually
Yeah,
my wife growing up had like the 18 van.
right.
We just have the biggest car you can buy that isn't a conversion van. So yeah, it's I don't think they even allow our car in Europe, but no, it's a big one.
There's a lot of things from the United States we don't allow in Europe, but well, that's a whole different podcast.
That's a different
Um,
podcast. Yeah.
well, I think one of the things actually, you and I meet up from time to time. One of the things we chatted about a couple of years ago, when when you were still in Gainsight, was kind of this sort of the shifting sands, as it were, in the services role, and really kind of like the more of the commercialization of services and
Mhm.
services moving closer to or within and closer to the revenue organization, or to put another way, needing to be perhaps better masters of one's destiny from a from a bookings and a revenue and a margin
Yeah.
standpoint, right? Just being better at monetizing services. And I think you've worked in a number of different places, and kind of the philosophy of the business bleeds into kind of that philosophy of services, right? So to
Absolutely.
begin with, kind of you've seen a few of these different iterations. What's your take on the PS, on the role of PS in the market at the moment?
The good news for practitioners is I don't think we've ever been more important. Now, does your CEO and CFO recognize that? Maybe, maybe not, right? But I think the good news is we are the most important, and I think we've moved out of the growth at all costs motion that a lot of us got caught up in over the last couple of years with low interest rates. But now we have this really cool opportunity to have a spotlight on services in our true form of what we're supposed to be. Um, and and I'd argue that the services leader has the one of the hardest jobs at a company because we're the only group that, aside from the CEO, who owns the profit and loss, right? Everyone else owns maybe the loss or maybe just the bookings. You ultimately own both of those as a services leader, which is a really cool opportunity as we get to this mentality of growth matters and how we grow matter, and margins matter, right? So we are poised to have a really big impact. I also think we are set to become more important in the age of AI, which maybe sounds a little counterintuitive. I think there's two reasons I believe that. One is that AI is going to diminish our technical moats very quickly. If your new widget is cutting edge, your competitors will be able to catch up to that much faster, and they'll build something you'll be able to catch up to them, right? So technical moats are going to disappear faster than they have historically. And so the only thing that differentiates you is people. And services tends to be one of the main interaction points for a customer with your brand. And so the people that you have there can be a unique differentiator. I think the second part of that is AI is not a lean implementation usually. There's actually more services required. So it's an interesting dichotomy of AI is going to eat software and take all of our jobs, but ultimately someone has to set up that AI. So I think you
Yep.
and I should feel pretty good about our futures, and even in the age of AI.
Yep. Yeah, no, interesting one. I like the point about technical moats. I think that's really important. And I do think that, you know, I mean, we've in my business, we've never been the biggest, right? So base pretty much every competitor that we have probably has got more features than us, I would say, or more integrations. So it's always been the people that have differentiated
Yeah,
us, which is so I think I do think that that will accelerate. And I think, like you say, services are oftentimes the people touching customers, maybe more so than many other function as well. You talk about, services in its truest form. I think in its purest form, you're also like your services teams are talking to customers, maybe more than anyone in your business, right? Sales talks to a lot of people for sure, right? They have a lot of meetings. But in the in the landscape of like what's actually happening in the context of your business with our product, no one's talking to clients more than services in my experience.
yeah, and ultimately viewing your services team as a product is an important part of that whole commercialization, but it's part of your value prop. Um, I I joined DFIN, and I come from a background in SaaS where everyone's there for 2 or 3 years. I was at Gainsight for 5 years. I was the old man, you
Yeah.
know, kicking people out of my yard. Um, my average tenure in my services organization is 16 years here at DFIN. And
Mm.
so we've had account managers on accounts for decades. And
Yep.
so how do you displace that? How could you possibly, as a competitor, come in and say, we'll take better care of it? This guy's been around for 25 years managing your account. He knows your company better than you do. So
Mm.
it becomes a differentiator in ways that it's kind of hard to explain. And, you know, clearly that's not something that you can just steal and tomorrow all of your team's going to have 20 years of
Yep.
experience. But I
Yep.
think people start to become a product and part of your brand in a way that they haven't historically in this new
Mm.
world, which is exciting. That should be something that individuals get excited about, is you're now part of what the company's marketing and selling versus the necessary evil on the back end.
First thing I think about when you tell me that is like staff retention is very, very meaningful in your organization, right? Because it could be, that they're buying not the company brand, but the Peter brand or the Jonathan brand.
Exactly.
That's the person
Yes.
that serves us, which I think is also very true. You've worked in different business models and you've worked with different investor types. So how does this business philosophy influence how you build a strategy and manage the function? Because it's been quite different for you in this new role versus the old role.
Yeah. Yeah, and just as for some context for that, I've been at PE-backed firms like Gainsight was purchased. We were a private VC-backed firm before that.
Yep.
DFIN is a public company, and so seeing and understanding what you are in the business is probably one of the most important things you can do as a leader. And understanding, it from a maturity perspective, what role you play in the company. So if you come in and you're trying to play a margin leader in an early stage company. And early stage doesn't have to be a revenue. It's early stage maturity in SaaS or in professional services. As DFIN that I've joined is products that are full SaaS and we're fairly mature, and products that are, on-prem, and we still have printing presses, right? We
Right.
fit literally the entire gamut of the last 200 years of technology. So understanding where you fit in that, and early stage, and VC backed, you're there to fill software gaps, right? When people buy software, there's a job to be done, and the product usually doesn't do the whole job. So professional services, customer success, support tend to fill that gap of what they thought they bought and what what they actually bought. And then as you
Yep.
move up that scale, and you're usually a loss leader at that point, you're just there to get people on board, get them happy, hopefully retain them, right? And then you move up that, and the bar starts raising, which is okay, you need to still make them happy, but you can't lose money at the same clip anymore. And so that was kind of the transition we made from a private company to a PE backed company. Was Now we care more about margins. And I think it
Yep.
coincided nicely with kind of the change in the market as well, which is, you know, you're hearing from the board, losing 20% on margins is not okay anymore. We want you to be at 10, 15, 20%.
Yep.
And I think, from a goal, you're not going to see a lot of companies pushing you much past that, but they do want you to not lose money more. But your function then becomes a lot more, how do I do this repetitively? How can I hit forecasts? How can I manage this as a business more than just as a firefighting squad? And then
Yep.
ultimately you get to kind of the public side and or even a more mature side. And a lot of your job is based around how are we converting our work into additional revenue, right? So are we
Yep.
generating revenue on the work that we're doing, but in a more mature organization, am I passing leads back to sales? Because again, your point a minute ago, we have the most touch points, maybe aside from CS or support, but in a lot of companies, we have the most touch points. We're seeing their needs and their opportunities in
Yep.
ways that other people aren't. Do we have a method to pass those leads back? Are we expanding revenue?
Yep.
That's where we're all headed. And are we making money as we do it? So that we just keep stacking requirements. Nothing gets to go way on the side. We just keep pouring more on the fun, fortunate PS leader.
Yeah. I mean, so there's a couple of thoughts that I have there, right? One is you start to learn very quickly, like as a PS leader, that um, that class in accounting was either the one that you should have taken, or it's proving to be quite useful, right? Because when you get into a private equity backed business or a public business, then services can be either the CFO's best friend or worst enemy, right? Because actually, if, for example, if sales is lumpy, services can be the hero because you're turning previous bookings into revenue, both from the software side of things and from a services side of things. So I've talked to services leaders where they're like, I was the absolute hero that quarter because what we did in services, not with new clients, but with existing
Mhm.
customers or stuff that was in our backlog, by getting people to launches and these types of things, it unlocked revenue that we're now
Yeah.
reporting on and measured on, which was really surprising. So to your point, we're now more important than we anticipated to be. I think what
Yes.
comes with that though is I'm guessing quite a learning curve from a scrutiny perspective because you really have to be on top of the data points, your KPIs, your targets, and like forecasting, right? Starts to become very important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you start being judged on skills that didn't seem all that important earlier in your career. You
Right.
are essentially a finance professional, a sales professional, an
Yep.
accounting professional if you want to get deep
Yeah.
into, to 606, right? Like you need to understand how all these things actually work out, and you need to be able to land the plane every quarter. So that's something that's really different than a lot of other roles and becoming more important is, can I tell the business how much revenue I'm going to generate? Can I have all the machine working to actually hit that number and
Yeah.
land the plane, consistently? It's not quite sales of what have you done for me today, but it's not that far away anymore.
No, I think it's closer than many would admit. You use this phrase like the tour of duty with sales. So just to talk about that for a moment, because
Sure.
you've touched upon it there, which is the role now is so multifaceted and multidisciplined, right? But as I said, I think this, you know, we're in a world where we're leaning much more towards the commercial for many organizations than
Yeah.
historically you were a delivery manager. We implement software, right? Now it's like if you're being interviewed for that role and that's how you describe your job, you ain't getting that job because they're much more interested in how are you helping sales to close deals, deliver revenue, these types of things. So tell us why that tour of duty is how can a PS leader get prepped for that tour of duty or doing it? Tell us a bit there.
Yeah, I joked at the beginning, and it's actually how I usually introduce myself when I meet a new sales leader at a company is, hey, I'm a reformed salesperson.
Yeah.
And I've carried a quota, I've been there, I've knocked on doors, I've done the demos. And so I understand your pain. I understand how you feel every 31st at the end of the quarter. I've been in your shoes. I get that. And it starts to help you understand how they operate. I'd say one of the very first things you should do joining a company is ask them for their comp. plan, maybe not theirs individually, but their how are they paid? What do they care about? What matters to them? When does it matter to them? And start figuring out how you can play into that. A services leader who has done a tour of duty. And so this can be formal like mine. I actually started my career in sales and had the benefit of that background. But every services leader is in sales, whether or not they want to be. And if you don't want to be,
Yep.
you're probably not going to last very long. And so
Yep.
getting those formal tours of duty, let me go sit through a bunch of demos. Let me be the voice on the call explaining what our services are. That makes a big difference. And the ultimate goal is to get invited to these things. I was invited to two separate President's Club at Gainsight. And I'm very proud of that because I shouldn't have been invited, right? And having my team invited because they saw us as a strategic partner. They saw that when they brought us in, we made deals faster, bigger, and better. Man,
Hmm.
if you can convince your sales team of that, life gets much better for both teams. And so that's
Yep.
ultimately the goal is how do I ingratiate myself so they want me there? Because I can force it. I can, as an SVP, I'll come in and we're going to mandate things. But man, does it work so much better when they're asking and begging you for more resources on that side.
Yeah, there's definitely a blend of art and science in this. So this is an area where I'm super passionate because I am also a reformed salesperson. In fact, I probably never reformed. But I was always very interested in what happened post sale. Too
Yeah.
much so. Like my delivery colleagues in my old job at CB, they were pissed off because I was like pointing out, I was going to all the sessions saying, oh, well,
Yeah.
shouldn't we do that? Shouldn't we do this? And they were like, fuck is this guy? But because I was interested in that journey, because I knew we were selling like transformation solutions
Mhm. Yeah.
and people don't digest the whole thing. It was unlocked over a period of time, so understanding truly what happened in those sessions was super powerful. I think there's a few things linked to what you said. I think a comp plans is definitely number one. One of the things that we get a thumbs up on the Zoom for that. That's great. Because the thing about it is like there's some very simple things that you can do in communicating with AEs that are also that are strategic messages and tactical messages. So for example, if you're going in and you're talking to AEs about the value of services and time to launch and like our methodology, no one cares. If you talk to them about the amount of deals that are closed, that are upsell and cross sell within 3 6 months of implementations, there is
Yeah.
prick up. Now, why is that? Because the AE comp plan means that they get paid on year one licenses that are closed in that account. So if
Right.
you have a way to unlock those opportunities quicker, that's great. Another thing is these days you got staggered licensing purchases, right? You would have seen this back at
Mhm.
Gainsight. We'll buy
Yeah.
X. Salesforce has this as well. We'll buy X, then we release Y, then we release Z. If you can
Yeah.
get to value faster, you start getting to those upsells and cross sells quicker. And then I think from a strategic standpoint, as you say, you can either go in like elbows out and like put in auto attach, but it's really good to like I think in that tour of duty start gathering all the data and start looking at like PS consumption to ARR growth rates and
Yeah.
retention rates and NRR, and it's like, oh, loads of companies I talked to, one, I think MongoDB, Brad there was telling me they had 115% delta between people who consumed services and people that didn't. It's like when you start to hear those data points, everyone's
Yeah.
like spitting out their coffee, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and we had something similar at Gainsight that we launched our technical account manager program, and we gave it a year, and it was kind of it took off well, but it was and eventually this customer success side and the professional service side started saying customers who have consumed these products are more successful, and
Yeah.
it was to the tune of 20 points of GRR, right, of annual renewal rate.
But
It gets so much easier to sell when they go, oh, I can have more upsell, more cross sell if I sell this one more SKU. That
yep.
that simplifies your life and their lives dramatically. And so being really good at telling those data stories is yet another fun part of the services leader world. You have to be able to tell those stories back to them of why do you care about this? And you have to have the empathy of like, they have so many things thrown at them as a salesperson. How
Yep.
do I tell them stories they care about? And because if you're telling your stories about, I did X, Y, and Z, and our margins are A, B, and C, that they don't care about that. That
No.
there's
No.
no compound in the world that cares about that.
And there's also too much of throwing sales under the bus. Like as you say, they've like for example, if you're if you're a rep in a company that has multiple products, like go back to all the businesses that you've worked in, they started with one and they then ended up
Yep.
probably Gainsight had like five or six,
Mhm.
and then you've got layer on top of that all the services that are needed for that. It's complicated. You try doing a
Yep.
job where you're selling 10 products. Like it's difficult selling the value of those solutions as it is, let alone positioning services. And I think something we're going to go on and talk to a little bit now is how perhaps specialized functions
Mhm.
and roles like services sales can help with that. Because I think I'm trying to help people like kill that narrative around, oh, sales is just shit at positioning PS. I'm like, no,
Yep.
it's more likely that they're less than good at positioning the value of the solution. And so if you can help them there and increase their close rates, that's going to cascade through to services, right? It's if they haven't nailed that, no one cares that it costs 10,
Yep.
20, 50, 100 for services because you've never even got to that point in the sales cycle.
Exactly. No, well said.
Cool. I'm on a rampage this year. It's my rampage. So this bit I'm really interested in, and the reason why is in the Services Delivery Alliance, which is that the network that you
Mhm.
presented at when we were in Utah. What we found in recent survey was that actually only about 30% of companies surveyed so far have a dedicated services selling function, right? About another 30 are setting one up, and the rest don't, right? So you believe in this specialized services sales function. So tell us a little bit just in terms of background and context about your
Sure.
experience there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I'll maybe go back for a second to the comp plan. So as you look at a comp plan for an account executive, typically they're paid a high number on 10%, whatever happens to be on licenses, and then like 1% on services. So the
Yep.
company has built in this, you shouldn't care as much about services. As a services leader, I'm like, man, I wish that number was higher so they'd care more. However, as a stakeholder and a shareholder, that's exactly right. They should not be worried about selling services the same way they care about licenses. But someone should, and that someone is usually you, the services leader. That's a big responsibility. And so I've always believed that having a team who wakes up every morning and their goal is how do I put enough fuel in this engine to put out the results that we need to do. Now that can be results as far as customer retention. It can be about revenue number, whatever happens to be. But how do we keep fueling this engine so that we can deliver the results we need? And so the what I found, and I've done this a couple of times now, is you set up what I call a professional services team as an overlay. So they don't own customers directly, but their job is there to influence and care about that number, that our bookings number, in a way that I don't want to ask the sales leadership to do. And the rationale behind it, and I had a solution consulting leader share this with me of like why he thought we were important, and it stuck with me, and I think it's the best way to describe it, which is the account executive's job is the why. Why DFIN? Why now? Why should I go with you? Why should I trust you? Then you bring in the solution consultant or the solution engineer, and they are the what. This is the widget. This is how it works. This is you click here and X happens. So they've gotten the why and the what. And then services comes in and we own the how. How does
Yep.
this actually happen? What is the actual process to take these promises made by these two commission bearing people? And every buyer in the world knows that these two are on commission and they're going to tell them what they want to hear. You
Hmm.
bring in services, and we are usually described, in which I really appreciate, this kind of third party. You're not on commission, you're going to tell me the truth. And so I found that to be incredibly effective at selling and adding to that value conversation. But I think you're right. I don't think it's that AEs are just bad people and don't care. I'm actually 1,000% sure that's not true. They usually just don't know the stories and they don't have the the chops sometimes to sell that whole value because they're not in the trenches. And so what I found very, very valuable, we'll talk a little bit about the profile of people that are successful in this, but somebody who has that scar and say, hey, the company just like you did this 2 months ago. This was the problem that they were facing. This is how we solved it. This is a couple of things to watch out for. Man, that conversation from somebody with confidence and authority helps accelerate your deals tremendously. And so we set that up, and having a group who's dedicated day in, day out to this job is probably one of the most important things you can do as a services leader.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I think there's a lot of things in there. So one is I'm a big believer in the importance of language, right, in life and business, and this idea of them as this third party, right, and positioned as that, I think is actually pretty powerful positioning for a commercial organization, potentially of services in general, right? It's folks, you need to understand that they know that you're coin operated and you want this deal. Our job and the way that we're measured is on how we're going to make you successful, right? So those are two completely opposite places to come from. So I think that's very important. I do like the fact that you've highlighted like it's deal acceleration. It's the
Mhm.
volume of deals that you can close and the speed with which you can close them. I think really good salespeople are business people, particularly in
Mhm.
enterprise, right? They
Yep.
are business
Yep.
people. And they are several steps ahead in the sales process of where likely the customer even is. And one of the things that they know is that when we get the client to this mystical land to get them to this mystical land of vendor of choice,
Yep.
they need to be confident in what is going to happen during implementation, or at least that it's thought about, right?
Yep.
Because that's what they begin thinking. They're like, oh, how does implementation work? How long does it take? How much does it cost? How many people do I like? All of these questions start going through their mind. Why? Because everyone and their mother has bought software that's failed, right? Or been involved in
Yep.
that program. And in this day and age, that can cost you your job. So, so,
Yep.
so actually, like, the role of services to me is that custodian of the custodian of the deal in many ways in some instances.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah, and I think the point you made a second ago is a good point of empathy, a reminder that this might be the first time and maybe the last time this person buys software. This is
yep.
not a normal motion for most people, and it usually is a career accelerator or decelerator. And so that's going through their heads. They're going to go ask their boss for a budget they've never asked for or to use money in a way they never have before. So your ability to give them like you are the insurance policy, and I've even presented that to customers before of you don't want to buy a lot of services, that's okay, but you're not buying a big insurance policy for success for your program. You want to make sure that you're very successful. Let us help you. We are the experts in this arena. So
Yep.
I think that framework is very helpful of we are here to make sure that you're successful in ways that the other teams aren't asked to show up, and so it's a cool opportunity for a services organization.
Okay, cool. Now let's cover this next bit from a couple of perspectives, right? Because
Yep.
some folks will have services organization that might be earlier stages and therefore bringing in some specialists within the function that might mean more headcount going to the CFO, for example, things like this, justification. There may be some other questions about kind of where does this sit and how does this role harmonize with others, which was where kind of my brain
Yep.
goes, right, in terms of like how does this person interlink, like you mentioned the solution consultant, SEs and things like that. So help us understand, like, in terms of like org design, roles and responsibilities, go where you will, sir, but take us through kind of like that and what do they
Yeah.
do, what do they not do, how does it integrate? We can get into it.
Yeah, and as probably with all things, this is what's worked for me. Will it work for every stage and size of company? Yes and no. This is just what I found to be helpful, and it
Okay.
sometimes it's not to kind of have rules of thumb or something a straw man to beat up on. So, why I typically bifurcate this into two roles, and I'll talk about how maybe you can step into this in an earlier stage organization. So, usually have what I call an operational role. I've called it a deal desk before. This is kind of the back office and ultimately speed. If you're going to introduce something like this, you can't be a bottleneck in the sales process. It's the number one way to stumble is to say, hey, we're going to insert ourselves. By the way, it's going to add 3 days on to your sales cycle. You're dead in the water.
No
And so
bueno.
you have to have this kind of back office. And so the things that this group is doing, if you're doing custom SOWs, they're building SOWs, they're refining them, they're refining the number of SKUs. I'd also say I've created 3 times more SKUs than I've ever sold, and probably the most effective thing you can do is take your number of SKUs and divide them in by 90%. I mean, take it
Yeah, yeah.
down as much as you
A
can.
lot.
Like
Yeah.
SKU proliferation is not your friend, right?
SKU
And then
item
they're working
cycle.
through discounting and tracking overages. So their job is to protect the team. Ultimately, this
Got
is
it.
the truth tellers. Their job is to make sure that whatever gets put out there to the sales organization is approved, that the machine's moving quickly. And then there's sellers, and the sellers, they can be scoping if it's enterprise strategic kind of accounts. They can be joining calls and answering questions and positioning. A lot of this can be collateral creation, right? So if I'm not on the call with you, here's what I would be saying. Here's the slides I would be using. And so they're kind of expanding their reach by by creating assets. I've found the most success for this role coming from a senior engagement manager, project manager, someone who's been in the weeds. They're usually pretty good with people. They're usually
Yeah.
pretty good at explaining the warts of what's good and bad. They also know when to shut up. I was just talking to one of my sales leaders the other day of sometimes services people are very like black and white, like it works or it doesn't work. And you need to have some people who have a little bit of street smart to them of like, I'm going to
Great.
sit back. This is a commercial. As long as they're not saying things that are blatantly untrue, I'm going to let that part play out. I'll fill the role of the how. I'm not going to explain the what. The what is the sole domain and kind of the differentiation between the two. Now, it's easy in smaller companies to kind of blend a lot of these roles together. And honestly, when I joined DFIN, we weren't quite mature enough or ready yet for a separate team, which we do have now. So I actually just took from a couple teams and said, hey, you are a senior implementer or a senior technical configuration person. Part of your job now is to go start creating these collaterals to jump on phone calls. So there's a way without going to CFO and getting permission from anyone, just start dedicating some teammates time to this role, give them a reason to do it, give them some kudos and some spiffs or spot bonuses to get there, but start creating this kind of collaboration with the sales team. Because done well, the sales team will start demanding it. They'll start saying, "Hey, I need more people on calls," and so that will kind of create that inertia you need to stand up the team. And so now I'm able to stand up a team full of sellers and back office with a leader that a year and a half ago would have been hard to get that kind of support in the back end because we hadn't proven the model yet. We haven't proven that this is a value add for the team. And I can actually take people from the billable side of the house and move them over and still be a good financial decision. So you kind
How
of have
did
to
you
earn that
prove
right.
it? For clarity, how did you prove it? You took some people off the street, had them do the role for a little bit, showed the value of it, and then said, "Now I want some dedicated resources for this."
Exactly. You
Yeah.
can show they participated in 70% of the deals. Those deals were X bigger, right?
Yep.
Or Y faster, whatever happens to be. And so aside from just kind of tightening up your own world, I think the SOW, if you don't have one today, it's the number one thing you should walk away and put an SOW in place. Even that rigor will save you so much time and energy. So you can start kind of piling on these wins of now we have SOWs. Now we actually govern
Yep.
discounting, which is it's a wildly understated thing that a leader needs to be good at is how do I discount and when do I discount and how do I understand SKU creation so that I can discount and I can be of assistance to my sales team. So all those things kind of come together in this world. I'll throw out there from an incentive piece, you kind of want to model it on what I'd consider a solution consultant or a solution engineering, which is you don't want them compensated on an individual deal basis, right? Like an AE is. So you're giving them an overlay or a broader scope. And I've seen this anywhere in the range from 3 million plus. If you're really leveraging a lot of
Yep.
other, the sales team is really doing the selling, you're kind of jumping in down to they kind of own their own quota. They're going out and directly talking to customers.
Yep.
But even then, because you're typically shooting fish in a barrel, you're usually selling that type of services to an existing customer, $1 million quota, right? And that's very
Yep.
doable even for kind of a mid-level junior person. I have seen salespeople move over and be successful in this
Yep.
role,
Same. Yep.
but it's hard to teach someone battle scars, right? Like
Yeah.
to be able to come in with authority, say, this is what's going to happen, this is what you can do to avert it, or this is the benefit.
Yep.
So
You can
it's
get them
not a
from partners
no,
as
but
well. You can get them from partners, I think,
exactly.
the
Yeah,
good partners.
exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
Um, no, that's interesting. I mean, I think there's a few learnings there, right? One is it's interesting that you went to like the language deal desk. Like
Yeah.
I'd not thought of it that way, but now I kind of know the old deal desk that you used to work with. So yeah, totally get that. I think it's almost you've got this intersection, haven't you, between like sort of PS operations and the deal desk where you don't really want PS ops to be doing this because it needs to be commercial, right? So I think the point that you highlight around the SOW is so important. I think I'm amazed in my business at how much work and thought has gone into iterating our SOW over the years, and to the point now where well, they're almost like contextual SOWs. So there's some context up front about the project itself, rather than it
Yeah.
just being here's all the stuff that we do. And the reason why we brought that in was because they're actually good. They're very useful weapons pre-sales, right? They're like, you show that to a prospective customer, and if they're done well and they're slick, they're like, this is really well put together. And
Yeah.
they might be thinking, that's exactly what we need. So these guys do this a lot, for example. But it's also one of those things we should really need to get right because some businesses that you work with, and I'm sure you see this in the industry that you're in, someone's following that to the letter. They're like, they're
Mhm.
doing SOW sign-offs with you. Do you know what I mean? So it can come back to bite you if that's not clean. Um, I think the someone else I spoke to and sort of she talked about how you go and find these people is there she talked about the unicorns that sparkle, right? So the people in the engagement team or the PM community who have that little bit of pizzazz in front of the customer, that's also really interesting. Um, how do you, what's the sort of hand-to-hand combat and the intersection between, you talked about the why, the what, and the how between them and the SE. Is it, you tend to bring them in after a deal's kind of qualified, or like when should these folks I'm asking three questions there. When do you typically see these
Yeah.
people engaging in a sales cycle? Bit later stage than an
Yeah,
SE.
absolutely. Yeah, and I think this is the ultimate consultant answer, but it depends, right? But
Yeah.
I think it's complexity. We have some product lines where it's the same SOW every time because it's a very finite number of things that we need to set up. Those ones may never actually require it. Now they might require some insight, or if there's a special need, they'll raise their hand and we'll jump in. But
Yeah.
we don't want to add friction where friction is not needed. On the enterprise side, though, we want to be, into your point, at qualify. They said, okay, I understand the why, starting to understand the what, but I start to need the plan. I need to understand, do you understand me as a business? Do I understand what it's going to
Yeah.
take to be successful? So we want to be very early on this. So I think it's a little bit of how complicated your processes are, how custom your SOWs are. Those two things could play a hand, but there's not a too early stage, and there probably is. I just have never found a sales team who's
Mm.
abused that yet. That's usually the too late is what you're fighting.
Right.
I've never once said, "Hey, we're doing a first demo. Will you come?" Sure. We've never been invited that early on. So I think
Yeah.
sales typically they have their own domain that they want to own. I'd say you're advocating to be as early in the process as you can get.
Okay. We talked a little bit about quota, like,
Mhm.
and I've seen that as well. I've seen these folks with $1 million targets, multi-million dollar targets, which can sound a lot, but actually, when you get
Yeah,
into it, it's a mix of new and existing clients, and that might be three deals, right?
yeah,
In some businesses, in terms of the services side, might be a lot more in other ones for sure.
yeah,
Um, what about the sort of the ratio of? We talked about this a little bit when we got together to
yeah.
plan for this. Spoiler alert, people, we do plan for these podcasts. And I asked this question, what the sort of the ratio of services sellers to AEs is there any thoughts you have there? Is because like 1 to 100 might be they'd be pretty stretched, but is there anything you see there or any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, it was an interesting question when you posed it, and so I was thinking through it, and right, wrong, or indifferent. I think what I've landed on the last two companies, either on purpose or on accident, was about a 1 to 15 ratio.
Okay.
Now, what you need to, and again, this is capacity planning. This is PS 101, which is
Yep.
you need to have them available for 90% of requests, right?
Yep.
If they're only available for 5% of requests on that 1 to 100 ratio, or even a 1 to 10 ratio, and it's a high velocity business, you just need to be available. You need to be an asset they can rely on. And so you look at like a solution consulting ratios, maybe a 1 to 3 to 4. 1 to 2 in high enterprise. So I think you're maybe double, triple that.
Yeah.
But I think the ultimate rule of thumb is, are you available when they need you? Because if you're not, they're going to move on and you're not going to get as many at bats. So you need to
Yeah.
be available is probably the short version of it.
I think yeah, something I'm trying to coach, well, something we're trying to do internally, and something I'm trying to coach, I don't know, the services community on is like, I see a great deal. You use the word collateral. I see a
Mhm.
great deal of value in being able to scale your IP in services beyond calls, right? So how can you do that call without me being on that call? So for
Exactly.
example, if there is a, these are the types of calls that we want to be on, right? And these are the types of calls that actually we don't need to be on, but we need some form of collateral, whether it's written in a deck or whether
Mhm.
it's a
Yep.
video that explains an answer to that thing. Now, for example, you don't need to get on a call to talk about how you're going to integrate X with Y if you've got a
Yeah.
deck, you've got an ERD, you've got a data flows diagram, you've maybe got a little video that speaks to that and a bunch of logos underneath. You're like, okay, yeah, you guys can do that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in my space, when we were talking to a prospect about one of our coming off one of our competitors, the thing that got, I think, the meeting was the slide which had the object mapping from their objects to our objects,
Yeah.
and they were like, "Oh, you've done this before." We're like, "Yes, we have."
Yeah.
So I think like that collateral engine in the deal desk and in the role, the more that people, and I think AI will definitely have a role in helping for
Yeah.
this, but that to me is definitely, I get another thumbs up from Zoom, which is amazing. That will be that's definitely something to help you scale. I don't know if that's something that you believe in or you've seen
Yeah,
before.
oh, 1,000%. Yeah, I think, for some of the roles where it's a higher volume, faster sales cycle, our seller is actually more responsible for collateral and kind of
Right.
making sure they have what they need in real time versus being on every single phone call. We just don't have the bandwidth to that kind of velocity, but we're meeting them at their needs. They have the decks, they have the slides, and then, your number one friend, if you can't be in it, is the solution consultant. They typically have uh, ability to represent you better than the salesperson will. So a
Hmm.
strong relationship with your solution consulting group so that they can answer those ad hoc questions or they have the slides up their sleeve. That's a great team to enable or continually enable so they can have those conversations on your behalf.
Okay. Nice, nice. All right, good, very good. Brilliant 101. Thank you, sir. Final thing, which is kind of my fun topic, because again, you do some great LinkedIn comment bombing on some of my posts. And the one that I remember is like I did a post on which went super viral. It got like 30,000 whatever it is on LinkedIn. I don't know what it is called, but it was a lot. And it
Yeah.
was 70 CEO says 75% of delivery needs to go via partners. And you were
Yeah.
like, that sends shivers down my spine, right? So let's talk a little bit about partners in the commercial go-to-market. We've
Mhm.
only got a few minutes left, but just to
Yeah.
touch on this. So this is something that you have some wounds with, shall we
Yeah.
say. But how do you, so when I've talked about this services selling motion, the smart question is always like, but what about when we have third parties involved? So how do you adjust or augment the sales motion when external third parties are involved? What have you found works there?
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm not anti-partner, but I have a lot of scar tissue in this space. So
Yeah.
it's interesting, and I think the one that causes the most pain for all parties involved is when you didn't adequately plan for what you just described. So a mid-year dictate from your CEO of, hey, by the way, your numbers don't get to change because this is a rocket ship we're going. But by the way, we're going to send 30% of your deals somewhere else. That's the one that just causes all sorts of disconnect and discontent. So I think making sure as you're going through your financial planning for the year, your budgeting for the year, or your quota creation, whatever happens to be, that you're in lockstep with your sales leadership, your partner leadership, your CEO, your finance team of what are we planning to do and to offer up to our partner ecosystem, and what are we expecting in return from them? I think that's the one that I've had long conversations with multiple CEOs over the years is what does partner mean to you? And I
Yep.
think partner gets this magical like, well, partners are going to drive deals for us. Sure, but not the ones that you and I are talking about right now, right? If I'm shipping them and I'm handing them services on a plate, they are not going to go drive net new deals for you unless you magically have brought in a top global SI, which who are not going to lift a finger to answer an email from you for less than $10 million.
Yep.
That applies to such a small group of us that for the most part, you are talking about regional SIs or people who are have the bandwidth to take on excess work. And I've found a tremendous amount of success in that world and even kind of cordoning off bits of our business and handing it to partners. But ultimately, the only way to survive is really strong rules of engagement, really strong partnerships and training. And don't start too big. The one that gives me the most pause is we brought on a VP of partnerships. He went out and signed up 100 new partners without telling us.
Yep.
99% of them were out of business within a year because we didn't have that much work to hand out and we couldn't track their success well enough to make it to give them more work. And so we ended up with two or three partners who were very, very successful and were great partners in growth for us. But you just have to be like, make sure that you're in lockstep with your sales and CEO because what you'll be asked to do needs to line up with the financial plan of we're not going to generate as much revenue. We don't need to grow our capacity, which are good things, can be good things, but it needs to be something that you're all in lockstep on.
Yeah. There's definitely an education piece
Sure.
because there's a narrative that like, okay, well, there's a few things that can be happening actually. So could be that, your services revenue has suddenly hit a level where they don't want it to be more than
Yeah.
5, 10, 15% of company revenue. And suddenly it's like pull the drawbridge up and this thing
Yeah.
happens behind your back, not behind your back deliberately, but like there's a
Yeah.
board meeting and the investor's
Yeah.
gone, no mass, let's use partners. That's definitely happened to people. I think your point
Mhm.
about defining, then educating about what do we mean by partners, right? Because
Yes.
like third party services delivery partners who implement on our behalf when we take deals to them is completely different to a GSI, is completely different to a co-seller, to a
Correct.
reseller, to a VAR, all of these different types of things. And it depends on the level of experience that your executive team and your board has in and around this stuff,
Yeah.
because the board may not know that. They may just go partners and it's all the
Yeah.
same thing. So to your point, I mean, I think the bit that gets left behind, right, is, and actually you touched on it, which is in if that starts happening, I think priority one is not necessarily about co-selling, about how you bring them into the co-selling
Mhm.
motion, is like how do you enable them to deliver on your behalf well
Yes.
as quickly as possible. Because if you don't do that, then a load of your PS time is going to go against cleaning up messes, which
Yeah.
means all of this work that you put into services, sales, and all of this stuff just gets torpedoed because suddenly your rep is like off
Yes.
internally. So actually, like leaning into that, let's make them successful, and ideally a smaller number successful, right, is the best way to get into a like partner ecosystem piece because you've then got successful delivery partners. You can then reorientate the team internally to doing maybe some different forms of services to your existing customer base, right? Is that
Oh,
fair?
100%. And we are onboarding after we onboarded 100 partners and they all went out of business. We said, okay, the only way that this works now is you sit backseat. So even if
Right.
you bring us the deal, we're delivering it and you're watching for free over our shoulder. Then
Yeah.
your side seat, you're a shotgun, and then
Yeah.
we're going to watch you and you're going to pay us to watch you for a couple. And you kind of have to graduate to the point we said, okay, your quality is similar enough to ours. So NPS, CSAT, um, retention rates, all those things. We'd measure all those things and grade our partners on that. And only the ones who continued would be allowed to continue selling with us. And so it's a really hard motion to say. I think you made a great point. Is you have to completely open the kimono to them and say, here's all of our best practices. This is everything we
Yeah.
know, how we do, how we price. This because ultimately you're a stakeholder at a software company and ultimately that
Yeah.
matters more than you do, so you have to be willing to say I'm going to give you everything and treat you as our own. And so that builds phenomenal partnerships when you can look at it that way, but it's hard. It takes time and energy, and they have to be willing to invest as well, which a lot of kind of companies who are wanting to get into the space, it's hard for them to dedicate the resources and the investment to make this work on their end as well.
Yeah, cool, man. Thank you for coming on, sir. Really
Yeah,
appreciate it. Loads of useful insights there. I think just to pull a few things out. I think one that just that mindset of thinking about in this market that kind of services in its truest, or I'm going to call it purest form, right, is one that is playing both sides of the coin when it comes to the P&L, and therefore that discipline and that rigor that you have is as important a piece as the go-to-market motion. I think the why, the what, the how is definitely something that I think um, folks should think about including into their customer journey mapping, which is always one dimensional, right? And potentially doesn't think about the longer term relationships that you're having with the customers. But in terms of differentiating those roles, I think is a great thing to do. Having empathy, I think, is another thing that's like key to this commercial mindset. So, really great stuff. Thank you. Have a wonderful Monday, and
thank you.
hopefully, I will see you somewhere soon, my friend.
All right. Thanks, Jonathan. Appreciate you having me.
All right. Thank you, Peter.